So it's kind of very apt for us to make our last talk about how do we actually go from here and make this actionable and scalable. So I'm super excited to introduce Christina from Lens to talk about what does it take for us to build more consumer-friendly Web3 social apps. Please welcome Christina on stage.
Excellent. Excited to be here. I don't have Lens swag, but I do have 3 Rave tickets for the best Lens ideas after this presentation.
And that'll get people to pay attention.
Exactly. I needed to wake you all up. It's 3 p.m., so siesta time in Portugal, I think.
Well, we have a lot of coffee for a reason. All right. Well, I'm excited to have you on stage, Christina. My first question to you is I'd love to kind of know about your background and kind of, especially in the social Web2 space before this. And I'm kind of curious to learn about how you got into crypto.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of an abnormal background. I've been at the intersection of consumer tech and music as well as entertainment for the last 8 years. I feel old in this space when I say that I have a working history of 8 years. I actually got into crypto personally in 2017. And so my parents are Argentinian. So for obvious reasons, I understood the value of anti-inflationary digital money. And I was also working in music tech at the time. And so I was going deep into how the blockchain could be useful for musicians in the creative industry as well, to give them to give them a relief from the intermediaries that were impacting their independence. And after I left the music industry, I went and worked at TikTok during the stage where they were scaling growth after the Musical.ly acquisition by ByteDance, which was the entity that bought Musical.ly and scaled TikTok in the West. And in my last 7 months there, I was quite fortunate to be able to join a team. We actually formed a skunkwork team because NFTs were starting to blow up at the time, and TikTok strategically was looking at the space in trying to use this technology to solve its problems around creator monetization. So we were able to launch TikTok's first NFTs. They're still out there, so there's a little bit of alpha there. They're actually on Immutable X. But unfortunately, that project stalled. Lack of being able to really drive it home with other priorities. And the Aave team said, "We're building decentralized social," and I said, "Sign me up." The writing was on the wall, and I've been here for 1.5 years now, building Lens Protocol.
Amazing. Well, there's going to be a lot of things to learn from what the last 1.5 years has been. When we kind of look at Web2 and social apps, we kind of have an idea for what that looks like. You have the Facebooks and the Twitters and so many other social networks that are dominant in different countries, but it's not exactly mappable to Web3. So what does a Web3 social app mean in this context, and kind of how do you define this?
I've been doing a lot of thinking around this definition because, as you mentioned, you're kind of comparing apples and oranges when you're looking at Web2 social apps and Web3 social apps. And so the way that I've defined it is blockchain apps that are powered by a decentralized social layer. And one thing that we've seen with blockchain technology is it's scaled rapidly on the financial side. And the whole notion of owning your financial capital, but actually, your social capital is more important. And I think we've learned over the last 10 years with Web2 social, how important it is, and how decisions have not been made in our favor by big centralized entities. And so when I think about, decentralization is a spectrum, even when we're talking about even when we're talking about, Web3 social. And so, you'll get different types of decentralization in Web3 social. And, personally, my view is we need decentralization at every layer to be able to solve the problems and allow people to have more choice and more control of their social experience. And the last point that I'll make on this is, Web3 social, you can have applications that are not necessarily social applications now, but have a social layer to them and have now been improved. And so I think about Eventbrite a lot. And Eventbrite, is a great ticketing application, but they've never been able to add a social layer because of closed APIs. And so ultimately with Lens Protocol and the openness of Web3 social and composability, you would be able to add a social layer directly into non-social applications. And I still consider them Web3 social powered applications.
It's a very interesting way to kind of think about it, because you're saying that this can be introduced later on, if I understood that right. But as long as every layer is still decentralized, that's when you truly achieve Web3 aspect of this being social. Maybe another kind of question on that topic will be, what we kind of usually see is there's a lot of successful Web2 consumer applications, but we're kind of slowly seeing that port over to Web3. What do you kind of commonly see that developers either get stuck on or don't really get as they think about going from Web2 to Web3 and building something in this space? Are there kind of common pitfalls or just common things that they have to unlearn? What's usually kind of been your experience in seeing that transition from founders building into Web3?
From Web2 to Web3?
Web2 to Web3.
Yeah, I think the founders in Web2 don't necessarily always have a good sense of how important community is. Because when we think of Web3 social, you know, your profile is the main primitive, and you're able to take that and your followers wherever you go. And in essence, you become and Stani uses this word a lot, you become a liquid citizen. And so, you know, while community has been important to some degree in Web2, in Web3, it's even more important, because the ability for you to be able to take your social graph as well as your content, you know, at the whim, if a platform doesn't serve you, is very, very easy. So for Web2 developers building in Web3, the importance is to really focus on community first as you scale and as you grow.
I think community is a pretty good common shared theme for all of us, and in this room, as Youth Global generally, we totally are on the same kind of frequency there. As you think about Lens, what have you done to kind of foster this community, and kind of what's been like the last 1.5 years of getting Lens out there and having people play with what you have to offer on the social graph side?
Yeah, so obviously ETH Global. One of the main apps on Lens Protocol is Lensstar, which I would consider, you know, a multi-purpose blogging application. And that was actually created at a hackathon, you know, back when we were in testnet. And so, you know, we've spent a lot of time building the developer community, and also building tools that make Lens Protocol scalable as a distribution layer and a social layer within Web3. And what has been slightly difficult with growing Lens is, you know, we launched without a front end. And so when you launch without a, you know, proper user journey, and the pitch to Web3 developers is, you know, we're bringing a social graph and we're also bringing content liquidity. When we started Lens, we didn't have any of that. And so you're asking builders to build without having that context that you're also building at the same time. So it was a little bit chicken and the egg in some sense. So the way we really tried to focus Lens Protocol is we thought about different user types and audiences. And if we didn't have an application built on Lens that served them, we went out and did a number of integrations to allow them to have the utility of the social graph. And so a good example of that is musicians. And musicians in Web3 understood Lens from the get-go. You know, TikTok is their main medium now. There's no social features on Spotify. And so being able to bring those musicians in Web3 that truly got it, we got them in the front door on Lensstar, which wasn't a music application. But then what we did was we learned from those musicians where else they would have liked to see Lens integrated. And we built that utility for them and the flywheel. And then they ended up bringing more musicians into the space. Ultimately, then after that, we actually had a front end that built for musicians because they'd seen all the traction that the integrations in that flywheel had brought. And so, you know, I like to think of that a little bit of a playbook for success. And we are looking, for us, Lens Protocol, the most important thing is to bring content, to bring the hard side, which is the creators and their fans. And so by, you know, having this playbook on the music side, we're able to then, and this is very traditional social, where you take a playbook and then you copy pastor it with different communities.
So that's a very interesting insight, because I would have assumed when you got the musicians on board, they only came in larger quantities after they saw a front end that was specifically for their community. But that you're saying that didn't happen. You ended up customizing the UI after they already came in, or most of them came in with their friends. That's a very counterintuitive thing. Just you wouldn't expect that in any other context for Web 2. So that's pretty cool. What
We were forced to experiment.
well, you have to, and that's kind of how you understand, I guess, what's different. Well, speaking of experiments, what are some experiments that didn't work?
Yeah, a lot. The main experiment was when we launched Lens, saying we wanted to have a very diverse social graph. And that meant going after, we would go after different audience types, and we would take them all to Lenster. And when there's no user journey and there's no product differentiator for that particular audience or user type, they end up joining, and then they end up, not sticking around. And so we were lucky, we learned that lesson very, very early, and which is then why we continued experimenting and were able to troubleshoot. And now we have this case study with the music community and which has been, we are now with Lens Protocol, the music Web3 NFTs on Polygon are all driven by Lens.
So in this case, it is kind of the insight that you kind of have to just pick which subcommunity you want to go for, and until they are successful, you don't move on to a second area of focus for another community? Or is it more about the fact that you needed not just a journey, but a whole ecosystem for that particular interest to be thriving, so that they can just stick around even though they're not in large quantities there on the platform?
Yeah, you needed to build that ecosystem while you were parallel tracking and onboarding those users. But, whereas we were a small team, and so we had to, pick a certain focus point. But if we had more people and, we'll be able to do that and parallel track.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to start small, and once it hits, then you know how to repeat. And that's the playbook.
And that's a playbook for Web 2 social as well. You need to start small. You need to start focused. You're not going to solve everyone's problems, with one application. And so picking one lane and doing it well and building something that's, truly differentiated and useful, ultimately, at the end of the day, value ends up flowing.
Absolutely. One thing that you mentioned when we were chatting before this was a really interesting point, which was, in this context of Web3, people can just leave with not just what they built from their content side, but the entire graph if they don't like something, which is not really an easy thing to do in Web2. If I don't like Instagram, I leave. That's fine for me, but my friends, they're going to stick to the platform. I don't get to own my posts. It's a lot different here. How do you think about building something that's interesting? And from that point of view of, as Lens, are you focused on the graph or the products on top? Because people are defining what they want to do on the community side, but you are here getting people into the ecosystem. So what I'm trying to ask is, what is a good way of thinking about what possibilities are there for building interesting applications that people like, without being too prescriptive on, hey, you should do this, or just this use case matters? Which, if you were something like TikTok, okay, you can only make videos. They have to be 60 seconds long. You can and can't do this. But here, there's a lot more freedom. So I'm curious, how do you get people to be excited about joining the graph?
I think it's the utility and the different use cases and that aha moment for people. And it can be quite simple depending on, the type of person that you're onboarding. If you're onboarding someone in Web3, they understand the mission. They see that they follow someone on one platform and they're automatically following them on another. That's pretty powerful. With the Web3 musicians, they were able to actually directly drop a song as a post and have it collected and curated across multiple platforms. And so I do think that the Lens architecture and infrastructure provides for, baseline use cases that bring the Web3 community in the door. But then we need to continue building differentiated products to Web 2 if we do want to, ultimately onboard the masses. Because we've seen, there have been a number of applications that have launched, which is Web3 social on the blockchain, and they managed to drive a lot of hype initially, but then people don't really know how this product is different to Twitter, right? Other than being, a smaller subset of people from Twitter. And that is not what's going to allow us to scale. We need to pull out different triggers, such as creator monetization, being one of them, the opportunity to actually choose how you consume social. So the thing that I find incredibly interesting about Web3 social is you don't just need to build a front end. You can actually build, different parts of the stack. And so when we look at TikTok, for example, you have TikTok that controls the algorithm, which we all know is a great algorithm. Unfortunately, they control, it's a pretty good one. They control the algorithm, they control the moderation policy, which is problematic, and they control the features on the front end, as well as define how creators can monetize. In Web3 social for developers, you'll actually be able to have somewhat of an a la carte experience. So you can choose your front end, you can choose, your moderation policy, you can choose an algorithm that you like, and there's a lot more customization that can happen. And I think for builders, that makes it incredibly interesting because you don't just need to build a front end, you could build premium features that people are willing to pay for and attach to the front end that they prefer.
And that's a really big service here in design space because that lets you do too many creative things too. So you kind of talked about monetization there. What are kind of some unique lens specific or just Web3 specific features that you get on this stack now that you don't get in Web2?
Yeah, so the whole notion of user-generated collectible content, I think is incredibly interesting because we like to say everything starts at the social layer. And we've seen the meme coins like Pepe, they all gather steam because of the social layer. And, a lot of that happens organically. And so the ability for creators to, or even just users to, as simple as a post some interesting content that can be collectible. Potentially it could go viral. Down the road, people could, that would have provenance and people would be able to remix it and you would be able to trace that all down to that original poster because everything is on chain. So I think user-generated collectibles, it has a lot in the design space. And then this one's quite basic, but open data structures. So one thing that we've learned, and we chat with developers every day, we chat with creators every day, we chat with Web3 product designers every day. And one thing that we've learned from our conversations with creators is, oh, wow, I can finally understand, who the people that engage with me the most are across multiple platforms. And so, with Web2, it was all about influence and reach and likes and virality. I think with the infrastructure of Lens and the fact that all main primitives are on chain, you can actually gather a lot of insight into depth of your relationships. And as a creator, understand, oh, I'm actually more valuable than the number of followers that I have because the people that follow me actually engage with me more. And it's a more effective two-way relationship.
And you get to curate that through the help of other people building on top because you can now choose your algorithm or better ways to engage or some new plugin comes up.
Exactly. Maybe I want your algorithm.
Yeah.
See what you see.
There we go. Yeah. That is a really good way of thinking about this. What challenges do you kind of foresee just people kind of coming into this space as users for Web3 social over the next couple of years? Like, where are you going to see are the hurdles and what can we do to get millions more to be users?
I think we're currently building the Web3 social layer before the entire ecosystem has built an easy way to ramp into the space for non-crypto natives. And so I think if we're able to solve that, account abstraction is going to be particularly interesting. We'll be able to onboard more into the Web3 social layer.
In terms of kind of going back to, for others in the audience or just people who are going to watch this after, as they're thinking about building something in Web3 social, what general advice do you have for them to think about growth and how do they get their first X amount of users to really understand how they understand this protocol or the product? What's something that you learned from Lens that you can kind of share that people can apply and learn from and copy for a better world in this space? And what would you tell them?
The importance of community. and building in public is actually a huge benefit. And so, Li Jin wrote a very interesting piece, which was about psychological ownership. And so as people start to build in the space, it's very important to, find the early tribe that you're building for and allow them to feel like owners in the product that you're building. And that can be, through ways Lenster, which built one of the biggest applications on Lens, they actually managed to crowdsource $100,000 from their early supporters to provide a gasless experience.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, they did that through the Collect module, and now they know who all of these early supporters are to be able to continue to build onto that loyalty and ensure that they have a sticky community. So that was a great example. Other products on Lens are exploring how to do this more so on like the native product feature side, so loyalty badges and those types of growth hacks. But I do think that while community is incredibly important in this space and can somewhat be scary because it needs to be a main focus, it's also very exciting because open source and the technology allows you with richer ways to actually build that community and those feedback loops.
Building in public and focusing on your community to actually help grow the initial early users. And I feel like that's luckily true for more than just social, and that's a pretty good recipe for getting people to care early on and help you succeed.
Yeah, and even we can even look at Web2 on this community point. When I was at TikTok and we found out that Instagram was copying our product with Reels, and we all managed to actually be able to see the product specs, and it was exactly the same. And Mark Zuckerberg decided to launch this feature during, the time when Trump was going to ban TikTok. We were all incredibly frightened. And our COO sat us down and said they can copy our product, but they can't copy our community. And so I think that rings true for Web2 and even more so for Web3 social builders.
I think that's a wonderful note to end this on. This is very actionable advice for everybody in this space. And I want to thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Yes,